I will say this. I think it is time to be radical, but it is radical through justice. I don't think it's time to be calm. But as you say, that anger does need to be harnessed properly. If we do this right, the left can be crushed. We can break their back in this moment, but it should be done in a way that is presentable to the average person.
Absolutely. I don't want the takeaway from this to be that we soft pedal the response. That is not the takeaway. The takeaway is that we go as fast and hard as we can, but we drive inside the lines on the road. And the reason to do that is because we don't want to end up in a ditch before we get to the finish line. This is going to take a long time. There shouldn't be an expectation that you wake up tomorrow and every Antifa member is in jail. That is just simply not realistic. We need to be realistic. We need to understand that this is going to carry into the midterms, into the next term. We need to continue winning elections. We need to continue winning governor seats. We need to continue winning Senate seats, et cetera, et cetera. We need to get our judges in. And we do that by being responsible, by the polity in this country looking at us and saying, these are the people with rightful authority, legitimate rightful authority to serve on behalf of our interests. And that has to be preserved. That is the way this works. Okay, so we can get all sort of angry and we can sort of lash out and be rash about this and have it end in the ditch in 6 months, or we can have a long-term march that has lasting and durable change.
Yeah, and Trump has already hinted at this. He's already talked about going after the Soros network, talked about the fact that there is a wider network of left-wing violence that needs to be shut down. So I think that Trump knows ultimately that this is something that needs to happen, but he has to execute here. And I think that is absolutely critical, because remember, it's not just these organizations. As we said, this kid we're still learning lots of information. Everything's still coming in. But from what we've seen, this student was radicalized not by his parents. This isn't like a Democratic family. He was radicalized by people online, by the college. And so here's the next step that I think needs to be taken. And you might disagree with me here, but I think this is pretty serious. Yesterday, the Jacobin came out with political violence is bad article. And of course, I know they don't mean it, because they're called Jacobin. It's literally a magazine named after a bloody French Revolution where they murdered Christians and priests and everyone else they could. And Glenn Greenwald got in my mentions and said, oh, well, actually, no, of course, Jacobin has never called for violence. And of course they mean it. And just because they have a name, it doesn't matter. Now, I know that's garbage, because Glenn's not going to go name his outlet the Wehrmacht tomorrow, because the name really doesn't matter. But it's also garbage because when I presented him with the fact, he said, oh, well, show me where these people have called for violence. I said, okay, here are several articles in a row where they call every Trump supporter a fascist, say he's a threat to democracy. They're going to, destroy the country, just kill minorities, put women in the Handmaid's Tale, all this stuff. And this is the stuff that drives people to this position. And he got angry and he said, oh, well, that's just a leftist position. You're just saying, that words are violence. And in the case of the word fascist, the answer is yes, it is. I'm sorry. Yes, it is. Fascist is a special word in our society. It's not even the same as communist. It should be. Communists are way worse than fascists. And I think fascists were bad, but communists are clearly worse. But in the left, because we are in America, because the left is just communist through and through, and they've been in power in so long, we don't even blink when these people name themselves after murderous organizations. And they have turned Hitler and the Nazis into secular Satan and secular demons. And therefore, if they call you a Nazi or a fascist, what they are saying is you are not human. You are the embodiment of evil. And I have a moral, not just the moral right, but the moral duty to kill you. And so I think the term fascist being used by news organizations, by professors, by politicians, this needs to become as forbidden as someone standing up and calling for lynching. This needs to have the same moral response, both from the culture and from institutions, if this occurs.
Yeah, I mean, look, as someone who's been on the receiving end of that, these kinds of accusations that, as we now know and have known, puts you on the other side of violent lunatics who think it is their moral duty to act on these kinds of libels, which is what they are. I agree. There needs to be a serious reconsideration about how we treat this language, both as a legal matter and as a social matter. I don't know. And when you say it, you think I could hear you, maybe suggesting that I might not agree on free speech grounds. And I have to be honest that when I think about these things, that it's hard for me to reconcile what I prefer the world to be like versus what it is. And I have to be honest with myself about what the world is right now, what these words mean in the context of our current political and social environment. And when I take a look at the reality of what they mean and leave aside my preferences about how they ought to be treated, there is only one reasonable response to this. There is only one reasonable way that we can return to an orderly and just and sane society. And it is to exact consequences, real costs, punishment on people who use this kind of language, knowing full well exactly what it is going to result in. What that looks like exactly, I don't know. That is something for the DOJ to decide. That is something for our courts to decide. And frankly, I won't be a part of that conversation, I don't think. But certainly, I would like to be a part of the cultural conversation in which we no longer tolerate that kind of activity. And we apply real hard pressure on, again, any institution, any entity, any outlet who allows that kind of rhetoric to be casually used. We have to have better standards, and we have to apply them with soft power if necessary, where we can. And this is something that I think, the right is a little bit maybe unfamiliar with. I shouldn't say unwilling to use, it's just unfamiliar. We are finally in a place where we can actually wield some amount of soft power, some amount of soft cultural power. We don't yet know exactly what that looks like because none of us have been in a position to do this before. Now that we are, we have to take advantage of it. Of course, the left has been doing this forever, successfully. They have determined the terms of debate, what is allowed to be said, what isn't. They have determined the moral landscape under which we have these conversations, under which we hash out our political disagreements. It is now up to us to determine the moral landscape, to determine what those terms of debate are going to be. And there is no sort of libertarian position where we abdicate that responsibility and we say that there are just going to be no rules. That is not how this works. If we don't determine what those rules are, somebody else is going to do it for us. We need to determine what those rules are.